How are you? Would you pray with me? God of mercy and grace, overcome our reluctance to listen, and in its place give us willing hearts. Melt the hardness of our hearts until they are pliable in your hands, until we sing with Miriam and Moses that you are the one that shall reign forever and ever. And all God's people say, Amen. C.K. Chesterton was interviewed and asked, this incredible Catholic theologian was asked, if you were stranded on a desert island and had only one book, what would that book be? And C.K. Chesterton said, if I was stranded on a desert island and had one book, the book I would choose, How to Build a Raft. So depending on where you are, changes what it is you think you need. So I want you to help me write a story. So I'm going to give you 3 tasks. I want you to think of 3 things, and then I'll invite you to say those 3 things to somebody close by. You ready? It's really easy. There's nothing but friendly people here. It's a great way to build community, right? So the first thing is one of your favorite nursery rhymes. One of your favorite nursery rhymes. Like 5 little monkeys jumping on the bed. One fell off and hit her head. Mama called the doctor, and the doctor said, no more monkeys jumping on the bed. Friday morning, my 4-year-old granddaughter Elise was jumping on our bed and fell off and hit her face on the bedside table. I got to accompany the family to the doctor to make sure she was okay. I now know why that nursery rhyme has been remembered, family after family, so that children could be taught not to jump with their grandparents on their bed. Now, if my daughter were to tell you the story, she would tell you about the fear and the fright in going to the doctor and what could have gone wrong. And if only she had been there to provide the proper care for her child, this never would have happened. I mean, that's what she would tell you. She's not talking to me. If I tell you the story, I'll tell you, I am the favorite grandparent. We had so much fun. She's fine. So I'd like to come up with your favorite nursery rhyme. May not have a story associated with it, but you'll have a nursery rhyme. And then 2, some iconic story out of your family that kind of tells somebody else who your family is. You know, the kind of stories that get passed down at Thanksgiving or at Christmas or whenever everybody gets together. Whenever there's like a wedding in the family, you've got to introduce Bob. This is the story you tell so they all know who he is. So there's got to be some kind of iconic family that makes story in your family that makes sense, right? I think I'll give you the 3rd one later. So let's just do those 2. One of your favorite nursery rhymes and an iconic story. Also, you'll only get 1 minute. You only go. So like, or if like you don't want to hear the rest of the sermon, we can make this 20 minutes long. Everybody share their story and we go home. We can do that too. Okay. So 1 minute, nursery rhyme, iconic story of your family. 1, 2, 3, go. One more minute and finish up. That'd be okay? Some of you are faster than others. Yeah, I know. Okay, thank you. You can take this up like over, like if you didn't get to finish, invite that person out to dinner, invite them to lunch, kind of build a community, get to know each other. I know people, their best friends are the people they know in church, and it happens around things like this. So thank you for taking the time. I saw many of you talk to members of your own family, and I'm just kind of happy for you that you're able to share iconically what it is that your family says, this is us. I'm just wondering if you were surprised. Like, did the husband or wife or member of the family pick something different than you did? I was just thinking that would be, like, it's not as iconic as you think. So what were some of the nursery rhymes? Hickory Dickory Dock? Little Boy Blue? Hey Diddle Diddle, the cat and the fiddle? Mary Mary quite contrary? Jack and Jill? Okay, the iconic things. I want to know if you, like, when you tell a story, there are these two ingredients that always happen in every story. One, there's the thing that happened, and then it's like a container. So you have the thing and you dip it in something. And so the container you put the thing is the emotions related to the story you're relaying. Like, you can't just tell the story, but there has to be some emotion related to the story. I have a job in which people come by to see me all the time, or I meet them in a hospital room, and the thing that always happens is they tell me a story. It's never the case that we don't share stories. And whenever they share a story, whenever we tell stories, they tell me an event, and then they tell me the emotion that goes with the event. The two always go one and the other. Often when people come by to see me, they want me to share with them outrage at their spouse for how bad they are. Right? And so they can't just tell me the story, but they have to make sure I understand the injury they suffered because of the work of somebody else. And it's often true. It's not that it's not true. It's just the way that other person's story is shaped now is a whole lot of information is deleted, and one particular set of things are included and exaggerated so that the emotional impact is complete. Now, you know we all do that, right? We have the event and we have the story, and we want that story to have momentum, so we tell it with enough emotion that it perpetuates itself. It's kind of like sitting in front of the Nats hoping they win the 5th game. Don't you think, like, if we watch the replays enough, this time we're going to get 10 runs instead of 8? So you're watching the Nats, and you have in front of you celery or chips, kind of depending upon your denomination you grew up in. And then you have some kind of dip you have to put the chips or the celery in. And it can be cheese, and it can be avocado, and it can be salsa. But you're going to take it and dip it in something. So everything we have, we kind of dip it in something. So I want to take and look at the story. Your iconic story is just like that. When you tell the iconic story, like me telling the story of my granddaughter, I didn't give you a lot of history of who she is. I didn't tell you very much about her or my daughter or my family. I just made a story that lasted, 30 seconds? And you were able to get some emotion and care and want to know that she's okay. All of that happened in just 30 seconds, right? It's the nature of story. When you tell it in a certain way, it gets a reaction. I want to look at the story of the Exodus and what we just read, this particular version of the story, and ask, what is the dip? What's the thing and what's the dip? You ready? So it's in the 15th chapter of the book of Exodus. Exodus is the second book in the beginning part of the Bible, called the Old Testament. While you're looking up, Ernest Johnson, our choir director, fell and shattered his hip, part of his hip. He had it repaired and has been in rehab, and he's joined us this morning for church. And Ernest, we're glad to have you here. I was thinking the horse and rider thrown into the sea, and I was thinking you brought that to mind, right? You go falling off your bike. Okay. In the 15th chapter, I'm going to be looking at what the women sang this morning. It's the Song of Miriam, the 20th verse. So I want you to see this entire... How many know the story of Exodus? Most of us. How many would like to hear it told again? I love you. I love you. About 400 years before the Exodus, one of an Israeli family makes their way, Hebrew family makes their way into Egypt because there's a famine. And Joseph becomes a key leader inside of Egypt, and all of the Hebrews join him. 400 years later, that group of about 75 people has grown to 1.5 million. And a Pharaoh, when he tells the story of the Hebrews, does not tell the story of how gifted they are and what craftspeople they are and how they are a big addition to the country. He tells the story of the Hebrews as if they're a drain and a threat to national security. I'm not making a political point, please. This is just Egypt. You go read the Bible. So he says we've got to throw them out. We've got to overcome them. He doesn't want to throw them out. I got that wrong. He wants to kill them. So he has midwives begin killing the baby boys as they are born, trying to shrink the ranks of the people. It's in that condition that Moses shows up as a self-appointed prophet of God and leads them out. On their way out, 1.5 million people are making their way following Moses, and he leads them. Pharaoh doesn't want them to go. He leads them to the edge of what? The Red Sea. Now, if you're following any military leader and he takes you to the edge of water and there is no bridge, this is bad leadership. Like, of all the directions you could go, this was not the best path. So behind them is Pharaoh's army of horses and soldiers wanting to either kill them or bring them back. And in front of them is a sea in which they will drown. Now, I wish I could hear Jason preach this sermon. I wish I could be in Bishop Jake's church when he preaches this sermon. Because if I did, I would feel the oppression that 1 million people felt as they stood on the edge of the water. And at the back of their throng are people pushing because they're being attacked by horses and swords. There is no place for them to go. Bishop Jakes would make sure I knew, Jason would make sure I knew what it feels like when you think you have no choice. When you are oppressed, your back is against the wall. You can't go forward, you can't go back, and any direction you go, you lose. There is no future for you. I wish I could feel that kind of pressure, the sweat, the fear, the screaming, the yelling, the picking up of the children, the gathering of the family, trying to make sure people are safe that you have no power to save. And then, in that place, not in a place like this that's safe, but in a place like that that is the opposite of safety, there is where God acts. God makes a way when there is no way. God acts and blows across the water, just like in the beginning of creation. When God separated the dry land from the water, God separates the dry land from the water again. And the people walk across on the dry land to the other side. When they get to the other side, the Pharaoh's army chases them. You know that feeling like you can never get relief? You can never get out from under the oppression, that even when you think you're free, you're not? And then God destroys the enemy. The oppression is over. The people are free. If you had to ask what the sauce was they're going to dip it in, it's this sauce of pressure and oppression, and followed with a chaser of now you're free. You are liberated. So this is what Miriam sings. Then the prophet Miriam, do you notice she's a prophet? Just find it interesting. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." It's like their nursery rhyme. It's the thing they repeat over and over again. This story was passed down from generation to generation to generation for hundreds of years, but it wasn't codified, wasn't written down until about 400 years after the event happened. The reason they wrote it down, remember I told you about Chesterton wanting a book on how to build a raft? Israel, when they were no longer living in the promised land but had been exiled, were contemplating going back to the promised land. And when they began telling the next generation of what it would be like to go back to the promised land, they told the story of Moses and Miriam and to sing their song. And the reason they wrote the story was so that they would have their own exodus. They would go to the promised land a second time. You got it? So how we tell the stories makes all the difference in the world. The way this story is told is to know that God is the one who sets us free. Can I tell you just one other story? It's kind of related, but I just want to tell a story, so I'll just count on you and the Holy Spirit to put them together however you want. I kind of think that God has given us a grace in which we live that is buoyant and holds us up and gives us stuff we just can't explain. So a member of our congregation was seated in our pews. They had been part of Aldersgate for years and know our commitment to Route 1, corridor, and the poor. They also heard a song called Not Too Far From Here. It's a song about people in need, not only around the world, but around the corner. And the person asked me if they could set up a fund that would be called the Not Too Far From Here Fund that we could use to reach out to people in need. And occasionally, the committee that oversees those monies will give me write-ups of the people they've helped. And I thought I would share those. I guess I grew up in poverty, and so I know what the oppression of poverty feels like. I know what it's like every day when you wake up and every night when you go to sleep. And so I understand what these people feel like when the pressure seems so immense that you don't think there's any way out. And you know you can find God here. What really matters is, can you find God then, when the oppression appears as if there's no other way? Woman 31 years of age, without children of her own, has taken on 4 of her siblings' kids in a bedroom, 2-bedroom apartment, barely able to make ends meet. She's pushed over the edge when another sibling is arrested, and she takes on her 4 children. So with kids from ages of 18 to 2 living in a 2-bedroom apartment, she is pushed to the limit where she cannot pay her bills. There are a lot of other things that don't happen too, but you can't pay her bills. So the word gets to Aldersgate. People hear about us in the community and ask if there's anything we can do. So our committee knows that the family is on the edge of being thrown into the streets, which is a whole different level of poverty. And then you know how hard it is to get back in when you have all of the upfront cost for turning on utilities and all the things you have to do to get back in. You begin in the cycle where you just spend your life living in a motel. But because of your generosity and the generosity of the Not Too Far From Here Fund, we were able to pay the rent so that she's in the house, able to provide other needs that the family has. Before long, the person that was incarcerated will be out, and 4 of the children will go back to the original place. But I think it's finding our lives inside of this story of God's liberation of you and me by grace. This grace that is buoyant, that is God's gift to us. And inside of that grace, we want to respond to the needs of others. Many of you in this room know what it's like when life feels oppressed. It may not be poverty. It may be what we old-fashioned called sin. But when life just feels as if your back's against the wall and you have no place to turn, it's there that we want to find a grace and mercy that won't let us go. It's when you want to be able to sing the song of Miriam, that God has triumphed gloriously, that you and I aren't doing this alone. It is not by our grace, our mercy, our wits, but it's by the grace and mercy of God. It's a different story. It's an iconic story. It's the story of Moses and Miriam. I offer it to you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.